Hey guys, so today we're doing chapter 3, which is called Understanding Life Traps. I'm just gonna get right into it. Hope you guys are doing good. Without further ado, I shall start. Life traps have 3 central features that allow us to recognize them. Recognizing life traps. 1. They are lifelong patterns or themes. 2. They are self-destructive. 3. They struggle for survival. As we said in the first chapter, a life trap is a pattern or theme that starts in childhood and repeats throughout life. The theme might be abandonment or mistrust or emotional deprivation or any of the others we described. The end result is that as an adult, we manage to recreate the conditions of our childhood that were most harmful to us. A life trap is self-destructive. This self-defeating quality is what makes life traps so poignant for us as therapists to watch. We see someone like Patrick get abandoned again, or someone like Madeline get abused. Patients are drawn to situations that trigger their life traps, like moths to flame. A life trap damages our sense of self, our health, our relationships with others, our work, our happiness, our moods. It touches every aspect of our lives. A life trap struggles hard for survival. We feel a strong push to maintain it. This is part of the human drive for consistency. The life trap is what we know. Although it is painful, it is comfortable and familiar. It is therefore very difficult to change. Furthermore, our life traps were usually developed when we were children as appropriate adaptations to the family we lived in. These patterns were realistic when we were children. The problem is that we continue to repeat them when they no longer serve a useful purpose. How life trap develops. A number of factors contribute to the development of life traps. The first is temperament. Temperament is inborn. It is our emotional makeup, the way we are wired to respond to events. Like other inborn traits, temperament varies. It also covers a range of emotions. Here are some examples of traits we believe may be largely inherited. Shy or outgoing, passive or aggressive, emotionally flat or emotionally intense, anxious, fearless, sensitive, invulnerable. You might think of your temperament as the combination of your locations on all of these dimensions, and others we do not yet know of or understand. Of course, behavior is influenced by environment as well. A safe and nurturing environment may make even a shy child relatively outgoing. And if things get bad enough, even a relatively invulnerable child can be beaten down. Heredity and environment shape and influence us. This is true, although to a lesser degree. Even of traits that seem purely physical, such as height. We are born with a potential for a certain height, and whether we reach that potential depends in part on our environment, whether we are well fed, have a healthy environment, etc. The most important early influence in our environment is our family. To a large extent, the dynamics of our family were the dynamics of our early world. When we reenact a life trap, what we are reenacting is almost always a drama from our childhood family. For example, Patrick reenacts what happened to him, his abandonment by his mother, and Madeline reenacts being abused. In most cases, the influence of family is strongest at birth and progressively declines as the child grows up. Other influences become important, peers, school, etc., but the family remains the primal situation. Life traps develop when early childhood environments are destructive. Here are some examples. Examples of destructive early environments. 1. One of your parents was abusive and the other was passive and helpless. 2. Your parents were emotionally distant and had high expectations for achievement. 3. Your parents fought all the time. You were caught in the middle. 4. One parent was sick or depressed and the other was absent. You became the caretaker. 5. You became enmeshed with a parent. You were expected to act as a substitute spouse. 6. A parent was phobic and overprotected you. This parent was afraid to be alone and clung to you. 7. Your parents criticized you. Nothing was ever good enough. 8. Your parents overindulged you. They did not set limits. 9. You were rejected by peers or felt different. Heredity and environment interact. The destructive influences of our childhood interacted with our specific temperament in the formation of our life traps. Our temperament may partially determine how we were treated by our parents. For example, often only one child in a family is singled out for abuse, and our temperament partially determines how we responded to that treatment. Given the same environment, two children can react very differently. Both might be abused, but one becomes passive and the other fights back. What a child needs to thrive. Our childhood does not have to be perfect for us to be reasonably well-adjusted adults. It just has to be, as .W. Winnicott said, good enough. A child has certain core needs for basic safety, connection to others, autonomy, self-esteem, self-expression, and realistic limits. If these are met, then the child will usually thrive psychologically. It is when there are serious shortfalls in meeting the child's needs that problems develop. These shortfalls are what we mean by life traps. Basic safety, life traps, abandonment, and mistrust and abuse. Some life traps are more core than others. Basic safety traps are the most core. They begin early. Even an infant can have them. To an infant, feeling safe is absolutely central. It is a matter of life and death. Basic safety life traps involve a child's treatment by his or her own family. The threat of abandonment or abuse comes from those who are most intimate, from those who are supposed to love us, take care of us, and protect us. People who were abused or abandoned as children are the most damaged. There is nowhere they feel safe. They feel that at any moment something terrible might happen. Someone they love might hurt them or leave them. They feel vulnerable and fragile. It takes very little to disturb their equilibrium. Their moods are intense and erratic. They are impulsive and self-destructive. A child needs a secure, stable family environment. In a safe home, parents are predictably available. They are physically and emotionally there for the child. No one is being mistreated. Fighting is within normal bounds. No one dies or leaves the child alone for long periods. Patrick, the man whose wife kept having affairs, did not have a stable home as a child. His mother was an alcoholic. Patrick takes the mic. Some nights, she didn't even come home. She just wouldn't show up. And we'd all know where she was, though no one would talk about it. And when she was home, it didn't matter. She was either drunk, hungover, or getting drunk. If you had a parent who was a severe alcoholic, then your need for safety was almost certainly not fully met. We might say that Patrick, as an adult, is addicted to instability. Unstable situations draw him like a magnet. Particularly, he feels a lot of attraction to unstable women. He feels a lot of chemistry. These are the women with whom he falls in love. A child who feels safe can relax and trust. A core feeling of safety underlies everything. Without that feeling, little else is possible. We cannot proceed to other development tasks. So much energy is taken up with worrying about safety issues that there is little left. Unsafe childhood situations are the most dangerous to repeat. You end up rushing headlong from one self-destructive relationship to another, or you avoid relationships altogether, like Madeline did in her post-college years. Connection to others, life traps, emotional deprivation, and social exclusion. To develop a sense of connection, we need love, attention, empathy, respect, affection, understanding, and guidance. We need these things from both our family and our peers. There are two forms of connection to others. The first involves intimacy. Usually, intimate relationships are those with family, lovers, and very good friends. They are our closest emotional ties. In our most intimate relationships, we feel the kind of connection that one feels with a mother or father. The second form involves our social connections. This is a sense of belonging, of fitting into the larger social world. Social relationships are those with circles of friends and with groups in the community. Connection problems can be subtle. You can look like you fit in perfectly well. You might have a family, loved ones, or be part of the community. Yet deep down you feel disconnected. You feel alone and long for a kind of relationship that you do not have. Only someone astute would notice that you are not really connecting with the people around you. You keep people at a little bit of a distance. You do not let anyone come too close, or your problems may be more extreme. You may be a loner, a person who has always been alone. Jed, the man described in the first chapter who is dissatisfied with one woman after another, has serious intimacy problems. He recoils from intimacy. He keeps even his closest friendships superficial. When he first started therapy, he could not name a single person to whom he felt close. Jed grew up in an emotional vacuum. He barely knew his father, and his mother was cold and distant. There was no communication of feelings and no physical affection. We say there are 3 types of childhood deprivation: nurturance, empathy, and guidance. Jed was deprived of all 3. If you have connection problems, then loneliness is an issue for you. You may feel that no one really knows you deeply and cares about you, the emotional deprivation life trap. Or you may feel isolated from the world, that you do not fit in anywhere, the social exclusion life trap. It is a feeling of emptiness, a hunger for connection. Autonomy, independent functioning, life traps, dependence, and vulnerability. Autonomy is the ability to separate from our parents and function independently in the world, comparable to other people our own age. It is the ability to leave the house, have a life, an identity, and goals and directions of our own that are not solely dependent on the support or direction of our parents. It is the ability to act as an individual, to have a self. If you grew up in a family that fostered autonomy, then your parents taught you self-sufficiency skills, encouraged you to accept responsibility, and taught you to exercise good judgment. They encouraged you to venture into the outside world and interact with peers. Rather than overprotecting you, they taught you that the world is safe and how to keep yourself safe in it. They encouraged you to develop a separate identity. However, you may have had a more unhealthy childhood environment, one that fostered dependence and fusion. Your parents may not have taught you self-reliance skills. Instead, they may have done everything for you and undermined your attempts to do things on your own. They may have taught you that the world is dangerous and constantly warned you about danger and possible illness. They may have kept you from pursuing your natural inclinations. They may have taught you that you cannot rely on your own judgment or decisions to get by in the world. Heather, the woman in chapter 1 with numerous phobias, was overprotected as a child. Her parents constantly warned her about danger because they were constantly worried about danger themselves. They taught her to feel vulnerable in the world. Heather's parents were not ill-intentioned. Rather, they were fearful themselves and were trying to protect her. This is often the case. Parents who overprotect their children can be quite loving. Heather has the vulnerability life trap. Her ability to be autonomous in the world is impaired because she is too afraid to go out into the world and do things. Feeling safe enough to venture into the world is one aspect of autonomy. Feeling competent to cope with everyday tasks and having a separate sense of self are other aspects. These last two have more to do with the dependence life trap. With dependence, you fail to develop a sense of competence about your ability to function in the world. Perhaps your parents were overprotective. They made your decisions for you and handled your responsibilities. They may even have subtly undermined you, criticizing you whenever you stuck out on your own. As a consequence, as an adult, you feel unable to cope effectively on your own without the guidance, advice, and financial support of people who you feel are stronger and wiser than you. Even if you leave your parents, and many never leave their parents, you just get into a relationship with another parental figure. You find a partner or boss who can serve as a parent substitute. Dependent people often have an undeveloped or enmeshed sense of self. Their identities merge with the identities of their parents or spouses. The stereotype is the wife who becomes completely absorbed in her husband's life and loses the sense of her own identity. She does everything her husband wants to do. She does not have friends of her own, interests of her own, or opinions of her own. When she talks about her husband's life. Feeling safe enough to venture into the world, feeling competent, developing a strong sense of self. These are the components of autonomy. Self-esteem, life traps, defectiveness, and failure. Self-esteem is the feeling that we are worthwhile in our personal, social, and work lives. It comes from feeling loved and respected as a child in our family, by friends, and at school. Ideally, we would all have had childhoods that support our self-esteem. We would have felt loved and appreciated by our family, accepted by peers, and successful at school. We would have received praise and encouragement without excessive criticism or rejection. But this may not have been what happened to you. Perhaps you had a parent or sibling who constantly criticized you, so that nothing you did was acceptable. You felt unlovable. Perhaps you were rejected by peers. They made you feel undesirable. Or maybe you felt like a failure in school or sports. As an adult, you may feel insecure about certain aspects of your life. You lack self-confidence in the areas where you feel vulnerable: intimate relationships, social situations, or work. Within your vulnerable areas, you feel inferior to other people. You are hypersensitive to criticism and rejection. Challenges make you very anxious. You either avoid challenges or handle them poorly. The two life traps in the self-esteem realm are defectiveness and failure. They correspond to feelings of unworthiness in the personal and work realms. The failure life trap involves a feeling of inadequacy in the realm of achievement and work. It is the sense that you are less successful, talented, or intelligent than your peers. The defectiveness life trap involves the sense that you are inherently flawed, that the more deeply someone knows you, the less lovable you are. The defectiveness life trap often accompanies other life trap. Of the 5 patients we listed in the first chapter, 3, Madeline, Jed, and Carlton, had the defectiveness life trap in addition to their primary life traps. Madeline is the patient who was sexually abused by her stepfather. It is very common for mistrust and abuse and defectiveness to go hand in hand. Children almost always blame themselves for abuse, feeling that they must be very bad or unworthy of love to deserve the abuse. Jed, the man who becomes involved with one woman after another, has profound feelings of defectiveness. He covers up these feelings by adopting a superior, aloof attitude. And Carlton, the people pleaser, feels defective as well. Part of the reason Carlton denies his own needs is that he feels he is not worth more. Injuries to our self-esteem cause us to feel shame. Shame is the predominant emotion in this realm. If you have the defectiveness or failure life trap, then you live a life filled with shame about who you are. Self-expression, life trap, subjugation, and unrelenting standards. Self-expression is the freedom to express ourselves, our needs, feelings, including anger, and natural inclinations. It implies the belief that our needs count as much as other people's needs. We are free to act spontaneously without inordinate inhibition. We feel free to pursue activities and interests that make us happy, not just those around us. We are allowed time to have fun and play, not just encouraged to work and compete non-stop. In an early environment that encourages self-expression, we are encouraged to discover our own natural interests and preferences. Our needs and desires are taken into account in making decisions. We are permitted to express emotions such as sadness and anger as long as they do not seriously harm other people. We are regularly allowed to be playful, uninhibited, and enthusiastic. We are encouraged to balance play and work. Standards are reasonable. If you grow up in a family that discourages self-expression, you are punished or made to feel guilty when you express your needs, preferences, or feelings. Your parents' needs and feelings take precedence precedence over yours. I think priority is another word for that, maybe. Sorry. You are made to feel powerless. You are shamed when you act in a playful or uninhibited manner. Work and achievement are overemphasized at the expense of fun and pleasure. Your parents are not satisfied unless you perform perfectly. Carlton, the people pleaser, grew up in an environment that damaged his self-expression. His father was critical and controlling, and his mother was frequently depressed and ill. Carlton takes the mic. My father was never happy with who I was. He was always trying to change me, to tell me what I should be. My mother was in bed a lot. She was always sick and in bed. I tried to take care of her as best as I could. Carlton's identity did not matter much. His parents used him for their own ends. He learned to push his own needs back, lest he made a parent angry or depressed. His childhood was grim and selfless. I feel like I never was a child, he says. There are 3 signs that your self-expression is restricted. The first is that you are extremely accommodating to other people. You are always pleasing everybody else, always taking care of everybody. You are self-effacing, almost like a martyr. You do not seem concerned with your own needs. You cannot stand to see those around you in pain and will repeatedly sacrifice your own desires to help them. You may do so much for people that it makes them feel guilty to be with you. Inside, you may feel weak and passive or resentful when all you're giving is not appreciated. You are too much at the mercy of other people's needs. A second sign that you have problems in this realm is that you are overly inhibited and controlled. You may be a workaholic. Your whole life revolves around your work. Your work may be a career or it may be other things. You may work to look perfectly beautiful at all times, or to keep everything perfectly neat and clean, or to always do things in the perfectly proper, correct way. You may be emotionally flat. There is no spontaneity in your life. You suppress your natural reactions to events, whether it is because you feel you have to do what other people want, the subjugation life trap, or because you have to live up to some impossibly high standards, the unrelenting standards of life. You have the sense that you are not really enjoying your life. Your life is somber and joyless. You somehow rob yourself of fun, relaxation, and pleasure. A third indication of problems in self-expression is having a great deal of unexpressed anger. Chronic resentment may simmer underneath, occasionally erupting unexpectedly, almost out of your control, and you may feel depressed. You are trapped in an unrewarding routine. Your life seems empty. You are doing everything you should, yet there is no pleasure in it. Realistic limits, life trap, entitlement. Realistic limits problems are in many respects the opposite of self-expression problems. When you are not permitted self-expression, you are overly controlled. You suppress your own needs and attend to the needs of others. With limits problems, you attend so much to your own needs that you disregard other people. You may do so to such an extent that others see you as selfish, demanding, controlling, self-centered, and narcissistic. And you may have problems with self-control. You are so impulsive or emotional that you have difficulty meeting your long-term goals. You always go for immediate gratification. You cannot tolerate routine or boring tasks. You learn that you are special, entitled to do everything your own way. To have realistic limits means to accept realistic internal and external limits to our own behavior. This includes the capacity to understand and take the needs of others into account into our actions, to balance fairly our own needs with those of others. It is also the capacity to exercise enough self-control and discipline to reach our goals and to avoid punishment from society. When we are raised in a childhood environment that sets realistic limits, our parents set up consequences for our behavior that reward realistic self-control and self-discipline. We are not excessively indulged or permitted excessive freedom. We are taught to be responsible, we have to do schoolwork and carry through our chores. Our parents help us learn to take the perspective of others and to be sensitive to other people's needs. We are taught not to hurt people unnecessarily. We learn to respect other people's rights and freedom. But perhaps your childhood did not foster realistic limits. Your parents may have been overly indulgent and permissive. They gave you whatever you wanted. They rewarded you for manipulative behavior. Whenever you threw a temper tantrum, you got your way. They did not adequately supervise you. They permitted you to express anger without restriction. You never learned the notion of reciprocity. Reciprocity. Clearly something I did not learn. Anyways. You were not encouraged to understand the feelings of others, nor to take the feelings of others into account. You were not taught self-discipline and self-control. All of these errors can lead to an entitlement life trap. In an alternative scenario, perhaps your parents were emotionally cold and depriving. You were constantly criticized and devalued. You developed a sense of entitlement later in life to make up for or escape the deprivation and devaluation. Entitlement can be damaging to your life. Eventually, people get fed up with you. They either leave you or retaliate. Your parents break up with you, your friends stop spending time with you, you are fired from your job. If your limits problem include difficulty with self-discipline and self-control, even your health can be affected. You might smoke too much, become addicted to drugs, get too little exercise, overeat. You might even commit criminal acts, such as losing your temper and assaulting someone or getting arrested for drunken driving. Self-discipline problems may also cause you to fail to reach your goals in life. You may have too much trouble disciplining yourself to do the necessary work. People with limits problems tend to be very blaming. Instead of recognizing themselves as the source of their problems, they blame others. Therefore, it is unlikely that someone with limits problems would be reading this book. They believe that other people have problems, not them. However, it is likely that many people reading this book are involved with someone who has limits problems. None of the 5 patients in Chapter 1 had limits problems. However, many were in self-destructive relationships with people who had limits issues. Now guys, that was Chapter 3. They do a little summarize chart in the book. I can read it out loud really fast in their appropriate categories. So Category 1, basic safety, abandonment, mistrust and abuse. Category 2, connection to others, emotional deprivation, social exclusion. Category 3, autonomy, dependence, vulnerability. Category 4, self-esteem, defectiveness, failure. Category 5, self-expression, subjugation. Unrelenting standards. Category 6, realistic limits, entitlement. In the next chapter, we explain how life traps work and how different people cope with their life traps. Now, I want to thank you guys for listening. Goodbye.